tonight the Flyers are supposed to be in action, taking on the Washington Capitals. I Canadianized the Capitals.
You've had better.
Okay. But they will not. Kevin Durso is here to tell you why and what's next for this team, because they do not have a game on the slate now until Sunday. And we'll get more information on that from 97.3 ESPN.com Flyers insider Kevin Durso as he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. And he, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. And there he is on the video stream. You can see Kevin in his home studio there. Looking good, pal. How are you?
I'm well, guys. How are you?
All is well with us. Tell us what's going on with the Flyers, because we did get the story you wrote at 97.3 ESPN.com a couple days ago that 2 games against the Devils were postponed. We were told that was due to Devils' COVID issues. The Flyers did not have the problem. The game tonight, however, has been postponed against the Caps. What's the story there?
Well, now it's a Flyers problem. And basically, for the last 10 days, the Flyers have basically been playing Russian roulette here with the whole COVID situation, because from the previous meeting they had with the New Jersey Devils, which was it'll be 2 weeks ago Thursday. And since then, the very next day, the Friday after, which was January 29th, that was the day that Travis Zajac was put onto the COVID list. And that was kind of the first indication, okay, from the Flyer standpoint, keep an eye on this, because now you played against a guy who is on the COVID list the next day. Keep it in mind. Try to go about business as usual. Keep testing. Keep making sure everything's good. And for the better part of the next week, everything in that area was fine. They played their 2 games over the weekend against the Islanders. They played their 2 games against Boston. They played against Washington on Sunday. And it wasn't until we got to the Washington game on Sunday that there was a little hint that something was up, because Travis Sanheim being out was a surprise. And it didn't really come with any explanation. He had practiced the day before. You're wondering what kind of injury could be. And your first thought is the COVID list. And sure enough, after the game, that's what we found out. He was on the COVID list. And that kind of sent the signals up at that point in time. But that was probably about 8 or 9 days out from that Devils game. So that you can kind of trace it back to that, because the Devils list has since grown from, I think at the time, Zajac was the 3rd guy on the list. And one of the guys on the list was Mackenzie Blackwood, who had missed that entire series altogether. And another guy was on the COVID list for something unrelated to the virus itself. It was to a situation where I think it was one of them was either having a baby or something with a family situation, but he was not on the list for that reason. And all of a sudden, your signals went up then. The Devils list has grown to 19 players. They played the Buffalo Sabres twice over that weekend. The Sabres now have 9 cases, and their head coach is also a positive test with symptoms. So that's a big problem. And that just kept sending the pressure up when you kind of thought that the Flyers were closing in on that timeline being over, of they probably made it through okay. Now the Travis Sanheim news comes out, and reportedly the story is there is another player who we will find out who it is probably around 5 o'clock this afternoon, when the NHL typically updates that list. We'll find out who else is on that list. And the reason being is it's a second player who's on the list. So that's why they postponed this game in addition to the 2 against the Devils. And now we wait and see, because the next time they could play is Sunday against the New York Rangers, which was also moved up as a result of all the other postponements going on. The bottom line is the NHL's got a real problem on their hands here now, because not only was it the Devils that started with an outbreak, eventually it passed its way through to the Sabres with those 2 games. Now it appears the Flyers have an outbreak as well, possibly. And now 3 teams in the same division are in the same position, with lots of postponements, lots of things to rearrange as a result of some negligence on part of the NHL for not putting a stop to it as soon as possible when they could.
Yeah, it's definitely getting ugly. So Travis Konechny was actually mentioning how they had to wake up at 6:15 to get this done, wake up. I was just curious if you had any more information on how this all went down from that perspective and what they actually had to go through to figure this out.
Yeah, so what they had to do is basically on Sunday morning, that was when they learned about the possibility of Travis Sanheim being positive. And sometimes, look, there's false positives, there's false negatives. You have to kind of deal with it going with the flow. And it shows you kind of the dynamic between an older guy on the team and a younger guy on the team, because Brian Elliott said a 6:15 wake-up call was really no big deal. I'm used to it. And Travis Konechny goes, I don't think I've ever gotten up at 6:15 for a game before in my life. So kind of that funny dynamic to it. But the bottom line was they were told to get up at 6:15 in the morning and got a wake-up call at that time, because they all had to take a rapid test to find out if they were negative just to have Sunday's game go off. And Alain Vigneault even said they went to the arena on Sunday not knowing if they would play, which could kind of explain the first period start and the way that they looked maybe at the start of the game, because they essentially, up until just a couple hours before the game, probably didn't even know if they were going to play. So they had to adjust to that on the fly. Credit to them for finding a way to win that game too, after going through all of that chaos in the morning to figure out if they could even have a game. But obviously they didn't come out of this scot-free, and now they're forced to go through this process now and see what happens with whoever this second player is, in addition to Sanheim, along with anything that could come in the coming days, because it's certainly got the potential to turn into something bigger than what it is right now.
So Flyers game tonight is postponed. Kevin Durso is with us here. You can get more information at 973ESPN.com. And, this kind of puts them in an interesting situation because they're supposed to play tonight, supposed to play Thursday, supposed to play Saturday. The game on Sunday was already moved, right? That game was supposed to be on Tuesday night. They moved the Tuesday game to Sunday. So I would imagine that Sunday game is a little bit up in the air at this point, no?
I think so. And quite honestly, I think that the answer to that question will come either tomorrow or Thursday. And the answer to that question to me will come if the Flyers add any more players to that list in the next 2 days. If they do, and it looks like it's going from 1 to 2 to 4 to, whatever, then they'll call that one too. And then they'll basically, because of the way that the rescheduling worked, they were supposed to play that game on Tuesday of next week. It got moved ahead to the Sunday. Now they don't have a game. If you take that Sunday out of the picture, now they don't have a game until the following Thursday. So you could technically postpone that Sunday game on Thursday of this week and give them another additional week to work this out before they play again. But it brings a lot into question still, because you just don't know. It's a long period of time to have to wait and see on a lot of players, and they're going to have to try to figure out a way to get it in check. I give the NHL some credit for pulling the plug on this tonight, because this is what should have been done when this happened in New Jersey, when they were playing Buffalo, and you could have avoided this with maybe one other team. It's inevitable that it's going to happen around the league, and I'm starting to wonder what you're going to do as a result of moving so many games, because now it's starting to really become a question of, can you even fit 56 games into your original game plan at this point?
Yeah.
You might either have to extend the season or just focus on points percentage, because I don't know that you're making all of them up with the way it's going.
Now, you mentioned that this particular division has a problem, but are there issues league-wide, or is it really more centered here in the Northeast?
Well, the biggest issue is in the East Division, because there's 3 teams now that have had to stop operations altogether, it looks like, and lost multiple games as postponements for now as the result of all of this. But there's other teams around the league. Dallas started the season over a week late because they had an outbreak going into training camp. Minnesota's been on postponement for several days now. They've lost a number of games. Carolina had a stoppage. Vegas had a stoppage. Colorado had a stoppage. And the common denominator here is they're all the U.S. teams. That's probably about a third of your U.S. teams in the league have had to stop play and stop practice at some point because of something going on in their camp, in their home arena, however you want to describe it. Something's going on in their area that makes them have to stop play, and then therefore affects other teams around them in the other divisions. The only one that hasn't had a stoppage to this point is the North Division, which is obviously in Canada. So that changes the dynamic, because they're under different guidelines, different protocols, being in the country they are. And so obviously you can see where the problem lies, though. It's very clearly a U.S. central problem at this point.
All right. The one thing, too, is that you could sit out possibly 2 weeks here. And as you said, that throws the whole season off thing here. And if it's only one division that is affected, that's where this is a little tricky. As you just said, one division's fine. They're just playing their schedule out. And there's another division that might have 3 teams not play for 2 weeks. That's when the NHL might have a big problem.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I'm surprised to this point, maybe, hindsight's 20/20 at this point, but when the Devils situation popped up and then expanded, and then the Sabres had the same problem happening, I'm a little surprised now that they didn't just go back and say, you know what, the entire East Division's on pause, just because they're the only ones going to see each other anyway. Now this whole thing impacts more than just the 3 teams that aren't playing, because now Washington's sitting there going, well, we just played that team on Sunday. Could it come to our side? How about the Boston Bruins, who played the Flyers last week, knowing possibly something was in an incubation period? It wasn't out there as a positive yet, but it still could have been. They still could have been exposed to somebody who was in the early stages of this thing. Now they're trying to react to this, and it could affect their schedule. It has affected their schedules too, to an extent, because Boston lost games when Buffalo's situation happened and the Devils situation. Same thing with Washington. Washington's now off for the rest of the week too, because their next 3 games were the Flyers and 2 against Buffalo. So they're off for the rest of the week until Sunday as well. So it affects everybody's schedule when even just 1 or 2 teams go in there like that. And I'm surprised that because they're all traveling to see each other, that they didn't just say, then the whole thing is shut down in that division while we get it sorted out so you can come back and be ready. But you're seeing the pitfalls of trying to travel to each city and trying to make this work in a time when it's still very sketchy and it's still very high risk that things could really get out of hand quickly.
I want to transition from the COVID issues to a rival of the Flyers, former GM Ron Hextall, now with the Penguins. It's interesting because he rebuilded this franchise. The pros, the prospect pool. It's amazing what we have here. The flaws would never call them up. With Crosby, Malkin, is there a chance to make another cup run?
To be fair,
what?
Hextall had a lot of other flaws when he was here than that stuff.
Oh, yeah, for
those stories, that was one of the most bizarre firing reasons ever, with the spies in the locker room.
The hot wings. The chicken wings, I guess you'd say, not the hot wings.
Seriously, though, guys, like Durso, are you shocked to hear that he's getting another shot after that story? That about all he had plants in the locker room reporting to him. I mean, I was pretty surprised to hear that someone else was going to let him run a franchise, even though what you're saying is right. He did a great job in although, to be fair now, yes, they did a good job, but this really sparked something for me, because when I read this today, I thought, man, how is somebody letting him run a franchise? That being said, all these defensemen that we kept hearing about, half of them can't play, though.
That's not necessarily. Just injuries, right?
Right, but I mean, we were waiting on all these different defensemen, Sanheim and Haig and Moran.
Yeah, he got hurt, yeah.
A lot of these guys, though, are just average. Now, he did restock a lot of talent. I'm not taking that away from him. But for what he did to be able to run a franchise again after all that, I found to be pretty interesting.
Well, I'm not surprised that he got another job, but I will say that to that point, there's a reason it probably took as long as it did for him to get another job. He had built the franchise back up. He did 2 things really well when he was with the Flyers. He stocked up on prospects and used as many draft picks as he could. So he got a lot of picks and then made a lot of selections that rebuilt the prospect pool. And he handled the cap situation really well because he took care of a lot of big contracts and found a way to get rid of them so that the Flyers had some cap space. If it's not for Ron Hextall doing what he did in his time, then the Flyers don't go out ahead of the previous season and make the trades for Matt Niskanen and sign Kevin Hayes. It doesn't happen without what Ron Hextall did to clear up cap space. That said, there's a reason why he was fired in December of 2018 and isn't back in the GM's chair until February of 2021. It took some time for him to find that right fit. And not only that, but you know what? I think that there's another angle to this because the Penguins just made the announcement official. It's no longer a report. It is an official deal. And they also hired Brian Burke as their
just going to bring that
hockey operations president. So that's really interesting because now that's 2 big voices in that room. And I almost, he's reporting to Brian Burke, and Brian Burke's certainly got a history around the hockey world as being a hard-nosed, tough guy when it comes to everything that goes on in a hockey operation setting. I almost wonder if this is a way to kind of almost, and I don't want to use this word, but it's the only one I can think of, to almost babysit Ron Hextall into this and keep a close eye on what he's doing so that he doesn't get too invested in just building the prospect system up. You kind of had to wonder, how is this going to work when Pittsburgh probably does need to put some attention on the prospect side of things and build for their future, but also still try to make a run at it because you do have 2 of the best players in the world in Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, and you're still trying to get that last little bit out of them. So I think that that's a dynamic to it, and I think Brian Burke's presence is going to make him have to focus on the here and now as much as he wants to focus on the future, and it kind of will change his approach to doing this. I also have wondered, I think of Craig Berube when he got fired by the Flyers and it took some time before he landed as a head coach and then he won a Stanley Cup because I think the second time around he had learned some things from that first experience where it wasn't as much of a fit and it wasn't as much of his skill set and he was much more equipped to make that run then. I wonder if the same thing goes for Hextall, that after going through that experience here, after trying to maybe micromanage the locker room the way he did after standing by the head coach he picked when the rest of the organization was saying make a change, things like that, if he would be a little bit different in his approach this time around.
Yeah, it's a fair point, but I think the Brian Burke hiring tells me everything I need to know about this Ron Hextall news, because I'm going to miss it. I don't know if this means he's not going to be on the Canadian media shows anymore at Hockey Night in Canada or whatnot, 'cause he's taking on this job. I love listening to him speak, but that's a game changer. I think that's more of like a, hey, we're going to make sure this runs the right way, but I'm just so curious what this organization is going to do. Do you try and squeeze as much as you can out of Crosby or Malkin, or do you kind of hit the refresh button as a whole? It's going to be a really interesting dynamic.
It is, and I don't think that let's put it this way. When you have a player like Sidney Crosby, I think it's a little different to say you're trying to squeeze the last little bit out of it. This isn't the same thing as a guy who you sit there and you look and you go, he's past his prime. He's on his way toward retirement. He's in the twilight of his career, but you're still trying to get a little bit more out of him when you should move on. Think about a guy who had all the success in the world, all-star qualities, things like that. And the Flyers had one in Vinny Lecavalier, who had a huge heyday, but when they had him here, he was past that point. But you don't stand by the guy because of his track record. You have to go off of who he is in the here and now. I think it's a little different when you have a generational talent who's a clear-cut first-ballot Hall of Famer like Sidney Crosby is. You are going to try to do as much as you can. And it's not like they have no pieces in place. They have a couple good young players that they can build around. I think of a Jake Gensel in that sense, but they have a lot of work to do with the current team, because their defense is equally as bad, if not worse, than the Flyers have. Their goaltending is suspect because they go ahead.
That's saying something.
I know it's saying something. And their goaltending too, because let's put it this way, they shipped out a 2-time Stanley Cup winner to go to Tristan Jarry for one All-Star appearance.
How do you blame them, though? The Matt Murray thing is crazy. How do you blame them for making that decision after that Cup run? You just can't. It just didn't work out that way.
That'd be like choosing Foles over Wentz.
Yeah, that's exactly what it would have been.
Right. Look, they've gone back and forth with this for years too, because Fleury was in the system for the longest time. They moved on from him. They stuck by Matt Murray. Then they moved on from him, and now they're going to Tristan Jarry. But it's just how quickly they did it. They had Matt Murray really in the prime of his career as a goalie with 2 Stanley Cups under his belt. That's the difference between the Foles Wentz comparison, because that's Carson Wentz winning the Super Bowl and then saying we're going to move on from him even though he won the Super Bowl. Not Foles won the Super Bowl.
The Fleury one. When they got rid of Fleury to keep Matt Murray, it's like he made the right decision. You can't blame them for that.
All right, Durso. Flyers have a couple nights off, but Durso will continue to work at 97.3 ESPN.com. When Flyers news happens, follow at Kevin_Durso. And, of course, you can hear him right here on the Sports Bash. And you can see him on the live feed at 97.3 ESPN.com. All right, Kevin, thanks, man.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.